This is Special Report.
Black holes are one of the strangest things in existence.
Neil Armstrong may have seen extraterrestrials on the moon.
When he spies a discernible shape.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
You can deny all the things I've seen, all the things I've discovered, but not for much longer. Because too many others know what's happening out there. And no one, no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Off the Beaten Path, brought to you by Full Spectrum Universe. My name is Rob Yox. We have an incredible show for you this evening. We're going to be talking about communities and civilizations in Appalachia that are lost or have ceased to exist. Much like, the tales of Roanoke and the first settlers to come to America, there are specific, mysterious communities within the mountains, some lost, some just misunderstood, that were there for a time, are no longer there, or have spread out across all of Appalachian area. So before we get into that specifically, I just want to touch on something very quickly that I've been seeing a trend on the internet, and it's come to my attention that scamming is at an all-time high. And I see so many people coming up to me and saying, or messaging me and saying, hey man, like I had this incident, this happened, that happened. Do the right thing for yourself, protect yourself, take all the necessary steps to make sure that your information is protected as well. I actually just did a deep dive for somebody trying to figure out who was the person that was, essentially basically an investigation for this person. So that's, first and foremost, I wanted to tell you that. But so we're going to get into topic here. As you can see today on the poster that we did, Off the Beaten Path, Lost and Mysterious Communities of Appalachia, we're going to be diving into the more recent history of Appalachia. And the first place we're going to be talking about is a place called Lost Cove. Now, I'm not sure who is familiar with Lost Cove, but Lost Cove is a community that only existed for about 70 years. It may have predated that, but when these people went into the mountains, they basically hung out and had a flourishing community. And then all of a sudden, just like the Maya, just like the Inca, just like some of the Native American tribes in the United States, gone. Now, what I did is I looked at specific reports of people from these communities. And what we're going to do is we're going to take dives into the Lost Cove and what that community was and possibly what happened to it. But like I said, a lot of these questions that we're going to raise can only be answered by the people who live there. So to track down these people is something that we're steadfastly going to do. But we're also going to be talking about the Melangean Tribe, or the Melangean type of people that lived in Appalachia that were of mixed blood, right? And the mixed blood gives them a heritage that is so intense. It's so crazy. It's so crazy. But first and foremost, let's show you what Lost Cove looked like. This is a picture taken from the Lost Cove community. As you can see, it's a little bit more modern. This is some of the more modern pictures, but this actual community dates from 1864 to 1957, right? So this is a article by a gentleman by the name of Dave Tabler, and he basically went to a person who was writing a book. Her name was Christy A. Smith. She's a part-time professor of Appalachian Studies at King University in Bristol, Tennessee, and she's also a director at the Unicsoian County Society Coalition in Irwin, Tennessee. And she published poetry about said Lost Cove, and she also wrote other articles and publications directing that Lost Cove was a North Carolinian community that no longer exists. So it's pretty wild to think about, but this community was there for an instant and then gone. So let's get into a little bit of the specifics about this specific community. So Lost Cove for over 60 years has remained a deserted community. So you can actually still go to where Lost Cove was and find it and basically walk through it. But of course, there's dilapidated buildings, things like that. So you're going to want to be very careful if you're going to go out there and check it out. But it's really wild that you can literally walk through the history of this place. I mean, it's got to have some major vibes going on. And, exploring places like this has always gotten me super excited. I love this kind of stuff. So getting more into it. So, Lost Cove is now one of the Eastern America's most legendary ghost towns. So there's a lot of paranormal investigators who go up to this place, and essentially they do investigations and try and contact spirits and things like that. The mountainous community with flowing springs, rolling fields, flatlands caters to avid hikers. The soil is rich. The forest enables families to live without the chaos of everyday societal woes, right? And it's also a sustainable community. Lost Cove boundaries, roots, and debates have filtered through newspaper articles in North Carolina for over 50 years. So there is a lot of superstition, aka mythology, that goes along with this actual place. So, that is intriguing in itself, right? So if you're from Tennessee, I see Billy's from Tennessee. Hello, Michelle. How are you? When I did things with Outlaw Paranormal and the Ghost Sisters, and we went through a lot of what Tennessee had to offer. There's also the Shrine in Tennessee. Tennessee is a paranormal hotspot for one reason or another. I don't know why, but it always seems to bring some intriguing evidence to the table of paranormal or supernatural activity, right? So let's keep going as we can go here. So, for over 50 years, they've been talking about this. The history of this settlement, situated high above the Nolichucky and Salto rivers, demonstrates how families in remote communities throughout the Appalachian survived from the Civil War era to around the mid-20th century. Here, families and land unite in order to survive, and also interactions with outside world are limited, and this is what we call going off grid, right? Right now, this would be classified as going off the grid, where, power sustainability is crazy. And even in the 50s, if you think about it, these families probably did not have a lot of electricity, working septics. This is a old style mountain town, right? From 1864 to 1950. So even after World War II, these people may not have had some of the creature comforts that we grow so accustomed to living in a society, right? And they thrived. But there's more to it. Again, this town was abandoned. Nobody really knows why. I personally don't know why. I'm digging deeper into it. But to highlight what we're looking at here, of course, it could, if we think about this rationally or logically, which I like to do as well, without electricity, without running water or septics, it would be difficult to keep a large community there, or any community for that matter. But a lot of what we know is people love to seclude themselves within the mountains. They feel safe. It's added protection. So for people to just get up and walk away, it's really, really wild. Yes, Lost Cove is near the North Carolina. It's in North Carolina near the Tennessee border. So it's right there on that line. It's actually within the mountains. I'll tell you where it was again. It was in, hang on one second, the Chilokee. Is that how I say it? Am I saying it right? The Chilokee Mountains, or that area. There it is. It's above Nolichucky and the Salto rivers. So there's no crossroads here. There's no highways. Only boundary lines and paths that stretch along a narrow branch from the popular North Carolina Flat Top Mountains, Joe Louis Fields, by way of the Spivey Mountains or the White Oak Flats in Yancey County, and Clinchfield Railroad tracks from the Unica Springs, right? So after they found a document that basically states an account of somebody who lived there. They went back and they found histories written by the peoples themselves, which ultimately draws this into a totally different, you know, it's crazy. It's crazy. So we have questions right now. What was the main source of work? Well, I would believe that some of it was just manufacturing the land to be productive and sustainable, right? And that's got to be all the work in itself. Of course, they would have made farms to create crops to be able to survive in this area. Otherwise, without contact or without being able to go back and forth to a regular city, they would have to supply themselves, right? So as we keep going, there's one account from a woman named Morgan Bailey, and it says her family moved into the cove and other families followed. They were the first people to go there. So this is a recollection of the scriptures of what this woman was the first family to actually go there in the 1880s, right? So such as the Tiptons and the Millers nestled into the secluded community. The people of Lost Cove were determined to battle the harsh elements and live a quiet life away from the chaos of war. This is a civil war now. So, since Lost Cove sits high above the Nolichucky Gorge, the terrain was ideal for an alternative lifestyle. We have more pictures of what this place looks like. This is what it looks like now. Okay, so we're looking at this. This was like the one house that was still left standing of Lost Cove, and there's a ton of pictures of this specific house. And we're going to cycle through them as I go through the information. But I mean, this is wild. So in 1934 to 1952, a gentleman by the name of J.C. Bryant lived in the Cove. And his grandmother and grandfather, Arch and Cindy Miller, moved in around 1926 to help his relatives Swin and Martha Miller. They were at least 13 houses in the settlement at one time, right? So from the Lost Cove station, Max English House sat next to the big branch. After English's house came, Aunt Hester and Uncle Willie's house, then the Miller's house and the Bryant's house and the Swim's house, the Velmer Bailey house, Clifford Miller house, the Chester Bailey house, Bob Miller's house. These are all names from this town. This town was it's small, right? So to know all the names of the participants, you know, it's wild. That's a wild thing. You don't really get information like this firsthand. And we, of course, we're not doing it firsthand. We're doing it secondhand. But the person who was writing this article actually got this firsthand. So, you know, now there were 4 houses from the 1930s to the 1950s. That's how small this community was. And the kinship was constant in this settlement. Its influence can be seen in every aspect of life. Lost Cove's families worked together to provide food and shelter for all in the settlement. And it says, if we lacked any item, we would borrow it from another family, and next year we would return the item. So families relied upon one another in planting crops, working the apple orchards, trading, timbering, processing wood, distilling moonshine, and during church ceremonies and schools, right? So this is a self-sustainable village. That's what this was. And after around the time of, you know, the after World War II is when it slowly started to dissipate. It dissipated quite rapidly as well, you know. And I see a lot of people in the comments saying, you know, that would be my type of play. Me too, man. Listen, Billy, I am all for this. And I think one of the things that we need to learn from this, and of course, nobody really wants to learn anything. It's just what it is. You know, we're just talking. But one of the things that we're seeing from this is the sense of community. And this is one of the things that highlighted this for me, because I believe that we have to get back to this sort of style of living where we can sustain villages, where we help each other out. The sense of community has gone off the rails. It's no longer the same. as it used to be. And, this is one of the things that for me is huge. I grew up in New York, but I grew up in a community, and I grew up in a community that was very close knit. And one of the things I miss is being able to see somebody outside of the neighbor and worrying about them and saying, "Hey, you all right? Everything good? Do you need anything? What's going on?" That I'm actually going to be writing a book on why community has been lost and what has done it. I think a lot of it has to do with technology, but this is getting back to grassroots. This is going back to mountain or living off the land, but at the same time being able to go back to nature, right? And using nature for everything that we need. And I truly think this is one of the places where we're going to have to get back to. So let's keep going. So in the 1920s, a gentleman by the name of Isaac Mack English laid the groundwork for a sawmill in the Cove. Residents such as Doc Tipton and Willie Tipton, Velmer Bailey, and Clifford Miller all worked at the sawmill. Mrs. McNabb calls Max Mill owning a commissary in a Lost Cove. So there was a store too where stuff like tobacco, snuff, sugar, and other commodities were purchased. This is, and it's crazy. They have books on the Lost Cove. That's how far this goes. And so let's get to the point where, it gets a little bit wild, right? So even moonshiners made settlement families in Lost Cove. They strayed from the religion and education. The Lost Cove dwellers' religion kept them closer to God, they thought, and the school provided the best education for their children. So it was literally self-reliance and determination were the key characteristics of these families. Three prominent families within this town were the Baileys, the Tiptons, and the Millers. We know that. And it was their home for nearly 95 years, right? Other families included the Bryants, the Coopers, the Howells, and the Princells, but they were moving back and forth within communities. So, it's really, really wild. But then all of a sudden in 1957, it's just gone. It's over. Everybody just picked up and left for one reason or another. But, there has to be more to it, and we're digging further. Now, some of the reports report of tremendous sightings of UFOs, of Bigfoot. They also talked about wolves in the mountains, and people were getting attacked, and things were getting really, really wild. So the wilderness was kind of pushing back on them, which is kind of, I take it as it is. Some people like to perpetrate these stories and grandiose them and make them so huge that, it's there had to be a reason other than what we're hearing that all these people left. They sustained themselves for 95 years, right? And everything was good for 70 of those 95 years. Of course, the beginning was a little tumultuous and growing the civilization, but then at the end, it also got a little bit wild. There was a lot, money became more of an issue. The land was being used up. It was being too used. They weren't growing as many crops as they used to. So it was difficult to sustain a society within this boundary. But this mountain living is paramount, right? And we know, and we talk about moonshiners too. Moonshiners know all about this. They create their stills in the woods, and they do all these different things to maintain cover and bring, an economic boom to a society that may not have had it. So there must have been quite a bit of trade if moonshiners were moving in, right? We know that for a fact. So, truly, this is just a wild, wild ride. We have one more picture to show you, and this one's in color of that house. And now it becomes a legend. And how does it become a legend? Many, many paranormal people have gone and investigated this specific house. And this specific house gave some of the craziest EVPs out there. I do not have the licensed properties to use them. They are not mine. So I can't show you. But if you go to Lost Cove EVPs on YouTube or Rumble, wherever you get your video stuff, you will find all of these different people have gone into these houses and into this area and have done paranormal investigations. Now, for me, what does that say? That says that there is something supernatural about these mountains in its entirety. And this is a focal point where people now are communicating with the deceased residents of Lost Cove. So, it's a really wild thing. It's really, really wild. But, we're going to give a moment of silence really quick for all the people of Lost Cove and the civilization. Hopefully, we can get back to that same style mountain living and make our way into the mountains again. I think that's, we always talk about history and things like that. And we always told everybody that in the beginning, the mountain range of the Appalachian Mountains was the gateway west. Manifest Destiny couldn't go through unless you went through the Appalachian Mountains. So places like this are historical reference points of where society was when they traversed these specific mountains. And, it's ultimately interesting to see how these communities lived, how these communities essentially, gone into how they produced for each other and looked out for one another. So somebody just brought this up, the Hatfields and Mccoys. Now, in a few episodes, I plan on going over the entire Hatfield and McCoy feud and, give you my thoughts and what we're thinking about it. This was a blood feud that lasted for a long time. And it injured quite a few people. A lot of it circled around the Civil War as well eventually. And it's a really wild time in the mountain ranges history. And it's ultimately interesting in so many different ways. So now we're going to get to a specific type of people that mysteriously showed up in the mountain range. And they had to do a genome sequencing, which I don't fully believe or trust, to know where these people came from. There is so much mystery and speculation of where the Melungeans came from. The Melungeans are a people that were of darker hue. They had dark hair and bright blue eyes. Wild. And I'm going to show you a picture of what a typical today Malunjin would look like. And I mean, it's striking. Ice blue eyes, dark hair. He looks more like an indigenous person as opposed to, a specific white person or a regular, European style person. So now there's a lot of mystery around the Melangean people. There is contact with extraterrestrials that goes into this as well, which we're going to go over a little bit towards the end because it's not verified completely, but they were also thought to be witches, a cult, a tribe. They were also known to be Native Americans, but we're going to ask a couple questions and we're going to answer those questions. So the first question we're going to ask is, who are the Melangean people? And in terms of when they first appeared in print in the 19th century, used in Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina to describe people of mixed ancestry. The Melungeons were considered by outsiders to have a mixture of European, Native American, and African ancestry. Researchers have referred to the Melungeons and similar groups as a tri-racial isolated peoples, right? The Melungeons have faced discrimination both legally, socially, and they have not fit into America's acceptance in specific racial categories. So this is a very, very polarized community. And we're not going to go into the racism or the persecution of them. While it is a major part of their story, I truly believe that honoring the history of these people is to not go over the bad times in their history. I want to go over some of the highlights of their community. So, in print, we've seen things like this. This is what they classified a typical Melungeon. It looks like somebody of, Southern descent, but also with hints of Native American features, which is pretty cool. It's pretty wild. So let's keep going. So we're going to find out what a definition of Melungeon is. The ancestry and identity of the Melungeons has been highly a controversial subject. Secondary sources disagree as to their ethnic linguistics, culture, and geographical origins and identity. They might accurately be described as a loose collection of families of diverse ethnic origins who migrated to the frontier areas, settled near each other, and intermarried mostly in Hancock and Hawken counties in Tennessee, nearby areas of Kentucky and Lee County, Virginia. Their ancestors can usually be traced back to the colonial Virginians and the Carolinas. They were largely agnonymous through the 19th century, marrying primarily within their community until the 1900s. So this community was isolated. It was a smaller community. It wasn't huge, wasn't big, but there are so many different types of peoples that describe the Melungeons, right? Like they have so many different. There is a wide mix of who these people might have been, right? So they are, like I said, thought to be Native American. They're thought to be part European. There's even people that said that freed slaves went to these towns and lived amongst the people. They're also seen to possibly be the lost tribe of Israel somehow. I mean, they it also is believed, and this is why I brought Roanoke up before, that, you know, they believed that they were essentially the ancestors of the Roanoke colony that disappeared, or direct descendants of the Roanokes, which can neither be confirmed or denied. None of it. So let's take a second and think about how eclectic this community was. No, the fact that this community was so eclectic means that the diversity of beliefs within this community draws attention to why some of them were seen as witches or voodoo doctors, or that they were called cabin charmers is what they called them, because of course they lived in wood cabins. But what they thought of them was that they were almost, not I want to say supernatural, but they thought that this community had innate abilities that not every man was privy to, right? So it's a wild thing that you would think people of, you know, American descent would be so stupid. And I mean, of course, we could look at Louisiana for voodoo and witchcraft, and Boston, Massachusetts. But what I'm saying is that the thickness of what these mythological stories or these legends perpetrated didn't do justice to the community. There was a mixing of all of these different types of races. And what that did is it bred a religion that was different than most all other religions, because it took the best facets of all of the cooperating religions and turned it into one. They even had a church in the Melungeon area or territories that they used to go, and they had their own books. And I mean, this was a culture that was happening in America during the colonial times up until the late 1800s, which eventually they dissipated as well and disappeared. But we're seeing that this history is incorporating, it's inclusive, it's not excluding from all these other areas, which truly is wild. It's a wild thing. So let's keep going, right? So another frequently asked question is, you know, are there other groups of people similar to the Melungeons all over the place or in the United States? And as many as 200 different mixed ethnic groups have been identified in the eastern southern United States, ranging from New York to East Texas. These include the Chestnut Ridge people of West Virginia, the Piscataway of Maryland, the Nitichokes and Moors of the Delaware, the Ramapo, the Lenape Nation of New York and New Jersey, the Cubans and Portuguese of the Northern Carolina, which we saw somebody say in the comments before, the Sumter tribe of the Choro Indians, the Wasamasa tribe of the Varnertown Indians of South Carolina, and the Creoles and Redbones of South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana. These groups share a mysterious origin and have historically been stigmatized by neighbors, which each of the various groups possess its own unique history and culture. Historical and cultural evidence suggests a broad kinship between these groups and a possible common origin, especially from some families. Those centuries of population and dispersion and admixture have influenced the ethnic and social character of each of these separate populations. Wild. Wild. There are more towns like this than people would imagine in the United States. And, this, if these people had dispersed across the entire United States, this would lead to bloodlines stemming back, to indigenous peoples. I would almost guarantee it that there is Native American in their bloods, which means that these cultures bred, like I said, their own myths, their own stories, their own religions, their own place in history. And they should be revered because they are truly, truly fascinating and interesting. So, another question I asked myself was, do these groups still exist? And, through intermarriage and migration away from their regions, many of these groups have lost their collective identity in the last half century and have blended into the majority population. Some groups with predominantly Native American heritage have organized as tribes, and few have gained limited government recognition. Others, like the Melungeons, are recognizing and celebrating their unique multi-ethnic heritage. So they're still out there, which to me breeds more to what are they doing now. And, we can do a follow-up show on that. But a lot of the people in colonial times in America, when these people started congregating into the hills, like I said, they saw them as witches, as soothsayers, as seers, oracles, prophets. They had this stigma of supernatural ability. And 9 times out of 10, when people are given those titles, it's out of a place of misunderstanding. And while I do believe that some people have the ability to have innate abilities of prophetic vision and things like that, at that time, these people were seen as almost outcasts. And one of the things that I truly love, is when we can go back and see these civilizations and these communities for what they are and celebrate them. What I'm doing right now when we're talking about these people is we're celebrating their history. While the stigmas may run deep, looking into who they were as a people and a culture is a way to give credence to what they did and the marks that they've had on our culture of the United States as a whole. And it breathes life into that melting pot mentality. And I doing this work for me is very eye-opening. And I'll tell you why. Because the more I look into these ancient historical cultures and peoples dating back from 1800 to 3000 BC, is ultimately me working on myself. And I'll tell you why that is. Because when I look into these cultures and I find the commonality between them, it shows me that a lot of these peoples are all the same. And we all come from a common ancestry. And a man who knows where he comes from is not a man lost. And I think that it's important to look at how these people interacted with their environment as well and get back to that. Because like I said about the Lost Cove, we need to bring back that symbiotic relationship between man, planet, and each other. Right? Think about what this represented, right? This is a representation of majority eclectic, ethnic, and different style backgrounds. But yet, when it came down to it, they were able to put their differences aside and live together in a harmonious way that was actually flourished an entire culture, right? That is still present today. So, this also goes to show that the impacts of what we do today has a profound effect on our futures. And to go into history is to celebrate these people again. And I'm saying that because I truly feel that way. And I think it's important. I truly, truly do. So let's keep going back to the question. So what does the word Melungeon mean? Right? We're going to look at exactly what this is. So the traditional explanation of the word Melungeon in French is mélange, meaning mixture. Another proposed theory for the origin of the Melungeon is that the Afro-Portuguese term malungo, supposedly meaning shipmate, yet another Greek term, melan, meaning black, or other researchers speculate that the Melungeon derives from the Turkish word Malunkin, meaning cursed souls. The Italian Melungina is an eggplant, referring to people who basically have dark skin, but it's a very, very wild terminology to use like that, and it's weird that I would find this in the research, but you know, there is Afro-American history within this group, and it's appreciated, and it's basically put forward. And a lot of what we're talking about is, and is exploring and loving these cultures. So, there's so many different terms and so many different words that we can look at the etymology of what the word means. Again, what it does is it's saying that, all of these people may have had a hand in creating this society. So ultimately, this is a bringing together moment, which is pretty wild. So as we keep going, what they ask what these people looked like, and I showed you the picture, and we're going to show you some more pictures of what these people actually looked like. So we're going to go back to this picture one more time. Right, he is of a little bit of a hue to his skin with light eyes, and we've got some ancestral people that essentially lived in this area. It was very, very wild, very wild time, very wild time. So this is what a setup of something. This is more of a coal mining town, but they were relative to where this was located. There was a lot of mountains around. Of course, coal mining is a huge commodity in the Appalachian area. So as we keep going, like we ask the question now: how do people know if who these people are? How can you trace your roots back to the Melangean people? And they have specific names that go along with the Melangean people. Those names include Collins, and this is surnames, last names: Collins, Gibsons, Mullins, Goins, Bunch, Bolin, and Denham. And over generations, many other surnames have become associated with the Melungeons. Of course, the surnames are common names in American and are only considered Melungeon names in the areas where the Melungeons lived. So if you're from this region and you have a last name, like I just said, you may actually, have ties to this community, which is really cool. I actually have, for a long time, I didn't know about it, but when I did my heritage, I actually had a little bit of Native American from the Iroquois side of where I am in New York. And it's very, very minute, but it was really great. And it was a lot of fun looking into it. So, some of these things, some of these places, and some of these peoples, once we figure out that we may be a part of them, it brings us to do more research into who they are, right? So the other question was, it was actually in the end of that statement: where did the Melungeons live? And I see in the audience we have somebody who was raised and proud of their bloodlines. Absolutely, you should be, Juanita. I think that that's incredible, and I hope that you explored it for everything that it's worth, because it ultimately shows you where your family came from, and this is some of the work that I'm trying to spark in people is to do this research and to get out there and do the work and put forward that effort to figure it out, because ultimately it's eye opening when you figure out where you come from. I'm telling you, it's one of the greatest things that I've ever done, to figure out where my bloodline comes from, right? And being able to connect not only physically with artifacts and maps and looking at papers, but spiritually. When you get that connection, it truly feels like something miraculous has almost happened. You're able to look at them and say, or look at like your past and the history and say, wow, that it explains a lot when you go back into it, right? So let's keep going. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee real quick, because talking for 40 minutes straight tends to get you a little hoarse. But anyway, you know, it's, and you know what, Michelle, there are moments, she says, doing my heritage now, and it's hard, but very interesting. It can be difficult. There is many avenues to figuring out where you come from. If anybody needs any help with that, I offer my services to help. And you can go to Appalachian Memes, send us a message, and I will do everything and anything in my power to help you chart your family tree and explore the places that you may come from and give you information on that. So I am open to everybody out there, and I will help in any way, shape, or form I can. This is something that I do very well. History and research are my bread and butter. So, if you need that help, reach out. I'll be here to help you. My name is Rob Yox. You can find me on Facebook as well. And, essentially reach out. We'll do whatever we can to help out. So let's keep going. So, where did the Malungians live? During the 19th century, the name Melungeon was applied to a people of mixed ancestry in Virginia and the Carolinas. But in the 20th century, it was used in mostly northeastern Tennessee. Land and tax records show some of the earliest Melungeon families in that region migrated from the Tidewater and the Piedmont regions of Virginia and North Carolina. Best known Melungeon areas is Hancock County in Tennessee, and particularly Newman's Ridge and Blackwater or Vardy Valley. Other Melungeon communities or families were found neighboring Hawkins County and Lee and Scott Wise counties in Virginia. From these areas, Melungeons migrated and established communities in southeastern Kentucky, southeastern and middle Tennessee, southwestern Virginia, southern West Virginia, and as far north and eastern as Ohio. And of course, not all the Melungeon families stayed within their communities. Many moved away when they were when they were not being discriminated against their ethnic heritage. But in the 20th century, the Melungeons have joined the more of the Appalachian urban manufacturing centers. So again, really, really wild. Now let's see, we have some comments. I'm just going to hit up some of these comments, right? So my mother is full-blown Cherokee. My biological father, I have 5 brothers and sisters. That's incredible. And I'm sure that if you look into the Cherokee heritage and my heritage in the Iroquois, they are linguistically very close. They have the same legends, the same myths, the same social structures. And it leads me to believe that the Iroquois and the Cherokees at some time shared a common ancestor, which means that, of course, I keep saying this, but I subscribe to the out of Australia theory and the Aboriginal people being that common ancestor. But that's, one day we'll bring Stephen and Evan Strong on and let them tell you all about it. So it's really wild. But so one of the things that I looked for was studies done on the Melangean people, that their genetic makeup, right? And basically their genetic makeup was everything that we talked about. They had such a wide variety within their within their genomes that it was difficult to pinpoint one specific origin for these people, which brings back to that point of holy cow, like this is a wide variety of a community that came together and created its own culture. And that's why going further past that point is very difficult, you know. So this is where we found the Melungeons. But eventually, like I said, they dispersed in the early, I think it was around 1950s, 1960s, they dispersed more into the populace of the southern Appalachian areas, but are now coming back together. So this lost civilization or this lost culture is now coming back together to be reborn and connect people, right? So that's what I had on ancient civilizations. There's one more thing I want to go over today, and it's funny because it's not included, and it kind of is, but it's not. But you know, one of the things that people say too about the I forgot to tell you about the Melungeons is that they have a what's called star seed heritage. And what that means is that they are, you know, they believe that in the mountains, these peoples had contact with extraterrestrial beings because of where they lived and because of the activity. In the first episode, we talked about brown lights in the sky in the mountains. They are also attributing to this area. Okay. And a lot of what this talks about essentially is the brown lights, and it's a very it's I will be bringing people on to discuss this further because I am not super versed in it. But there are people who believe that the heritage of the Melungeons is directly related to ancient ancestral basic like interactions with extraterrestrials. So that's a different story for a different day. We're going to dive into it. But one more thing I wanted to talk about today was that the government, and you're going to be like, oh, he's saying the government, but trust me, it's about fringy topics. Don't worry. So the government decided that they want to create a department in the Pentagon for UAPs. If you don't know what a UAP is, it's the new term for UFO. It's a unidentified aerial phenomenon. And what most people don't realize is that they already have in the Pentagon, or maybe not the Pentagon, but off site somewhere, this particular group or government agency that handles UAP. We've heard about Men in Black, right? The Men in Black that go around and they basically talk to all the different peoples who've had contact, and we've seen them everywhere. But within the Navy itself, they had a specific squadron that was related to investigations of these specific types of encounters, right? But it's funny how now they're kind of making this more mainstream where people can go and, you know, they can work in this field now, and especially with things like SpaceX and the NASA, which, you know, I can go into all these different like, you know, theories of how they're all capitulating to different agendas and things like that. I'm not going to do that today. We can go over that another time, but it leads credence to the think that, you know, they're really saying that they're going to make this department in the Pentagon, and we know it's already there. It's already there. So I find it hilarious. And the other thing I wanted to go over is it's funny. It's really funny how they rebrand the UFO as a UAP. And they come out and say, well, we have no idea what it is. And everybody was waiting for this disclosure, which is one of the reasons why we did this a 5-day, 55 speaker event called Total Disclosure. It's on my YouTube channel. And we wanted to bring the people the real evidence from the actual witnesses, contactees, and researchers, and some of the best people in their field, because it was a big nothing burger. Everybody waited for them to release this document that was going to be, you know, they're going to tell us that aliens are real, or, you know, extraterrestrials are real. Never happened. Never happened. It was just a nothing burger. We knew that. We knew it was never going to happen. So, you know, now what they're doing is they're taking this UAP, which is the new term for UFO, because they discredited people who encountered UFOs for so long that the actual term of UFO, unidentified flying object, is just lambasted with criticisms and stigmas, right? So they had to bring in a new word, which this is why words are super important. The history of those words and the etymology of what they mean is super important because it has history within itself. And, they were out there discrediting people who said that they have come in contact or had been abducted by UFOs for so long that no, when they want to try and bring information forward on UFO, they can't because they feel like that they're going to be labeled the same. And, it's just, to me, that's crazy. I'm still going to use UFO, right? I'm not going to change my mind. I've been using UFO forever. So, that was all the stories I had for you today. But I'm going to tell you guys about my encounter with a UAP or UFO. And it was a really wild thing. So, right before, about 2 weeks before the total disclosure event, and listen, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people who have had encounters. Never did I ever have one myself. I was always kind of like the outsider, which is why I call myself the ultimate outsider, because I look at a lot of things that don't directly affect or reflect on me, but I investigate them, right? So one of the I was outside smoking a cigarette with my fiance, and what happened was I saw something that looked like a star. And then you think to yourself, oh, it's a shooting star, right? Well, this thing, it actually went slow and then it went fast and it was as high as the stars. So it looked like one of the stars and it was moving. And then you think to yourself, well, that could be, the satellites that they're putting up there right now or whatever the case may be. But it went about, I want to say it probably went about, there was a 10-foot difference between where we were seeing it and where it actually just disappeared out of nowhere. So, it was like unexplainable, and I get it. It's difficult to say all that stuff, but it happened again. And it happened while I was in Texas. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning, Texas time, which is Central Standard Time. I'm outside smoking a cigarette. And all of a sudden I look up and I see the same exact thing that I saw in New York outside on my front porch. But the difference was that it was zigzagging this time. This time it was moving within a manner that I've never seen anything in my life move like. And, to me, what this meant to me was that was after the total disclosure event. The first time was before. And I've seen during different events that we've done that have had contact like this, essentially it was like a nod of approval from whatever's out there that we might be on the right track. And the second viewing of it, to me, and this is just me saying that, right? It's my own feelings, personal feelings. You can believe me, you don't have to believe me, whatever the case may be. I know what happened. It is what it is. You know, after the event that we did, that was them coming back and giving me another head nod, like, all right, you did good. You did good. Otherwise, they wouldn't have shown. My whole life, the 40 years of my life, I have never had any missing time, any contact that I knew about. But it was, these two moments that, and as I'm saying this, my right ear is starting to ring, which is kind of freaky at the same time. But, it had a profound effect on me, even though I didn't come in contact with whatever was flying this thing. Or could I have been mistaken? Sure. But, from people that I, for the first time, I witnessed it with my fiance. Now, she doesn't fully subscribe to what, ufology and things like that, but she couldn't explain it either, which leads me to believe even further that something had happened that we were privy to that evening, and it was a gift given to us to be able to see them, and my mentor in doing this type of broadcasting is a gentleman by the name of Clarence Mitchell. And, you know, he is a contactee and he has taught me so much. So I actually got to go back to him and tell him about this, which was incredible. And then I have my partner on events, who's Omar, whose wife has had, you know, multiple encounters that are unexplainable. And one of the reasons why we do what we do is to help people feel that they understand why or how, or, you know, try and give them avenues to do research and look at these things and try and make sense of it, right? So on that note, I am going to stop because there's, you know, we've said all we could say today, but I want to thank everybody for being here. You know, I appreciate everybody coming by and chilling with me and doing some talks and hanging out. And, you know, we have a lot of fun. And we're going to start having some people coming in and doing interviews, which is something I think I try, you know, will be a little bit more fun, have a conversation back and forth than to just hear me speak. But, you know, we're going to probably try and get the Ghost Sisters on too. I know you guys know who Mandy is. She's in the audience right now. Hello, Mandy. And we're going to talk about some topics with them about the paranormal, which is going to be fun. And you know, it's been a wild ride. So take from this what you will. And I appreciate all of you. And my name is Rob Yox. This has been Off the Beaten Path, brought to you by Full Spectrum Universe. We will be here again next Thursday night, 7 p.m. That's when we do this show. Thursday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you like what you saw, come back. Also, if you could, I would love if you could go to my YouTube and subscribe to my channel. We are very close to 1,000 subscriptions, and I'm really, really trying to get this thing off the ground so we can become, you know, a little bit more out there with everything and really, really help people figure out more about history and encounters. So I'm going to put in the comments the YouTube channel. Please go there and subscribe if you can, if you like what you hear. And yeah, that's it from me. So I will talk to all of you very, very shortly. And we'll see you again next Thursday. And, you know, love and light to all of you and yours.